Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Friday, this is January 2nd, 2026. And for everyone joining me today, Happy New Year. Hope that you've been safe and that you will have many successes in 2026. I'd like to thank all the subscribers who have joined me in 2025. Hopefully we can make 2026 a big year of growth in this channel, and I look forward to bringing videos to you throughout the year as often as I can. I can't guarantee every day, but at least a weekday. I certainly hope to continue to bring you videos. So anyway, let's get going for 2026. And today I was investigating the whole Kursk offensive. Why? Because 1 year ago we were still with the Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region, and for them initially it looked like a huge success, a morale booster, and it ended in quite tragic fashion. So anyway, let's get right into it. But the first thing is, what was the goal of the Kursk offensive? So that's really important because if a military doesn't have clear what its goal is, then we become like Vietnam. You take a hill, you leave it. You take it again, you leave it. Each time losing troops, losing morale. So anyway, what was the whole purpose in Kursk? Was it just one of these, let's take a hill because we feel like it today, or let's take a hill because it's strategically important for our military goals? So anyway, in this whole Kursk offensive, we see that the goal initially was the Kursk nuclear power plant. And how do we know that? Because the operation was aimed directly at the nuclear power plant. Secondly, this was the only real asset in the region that Ukraine would be able to hold and call it a victory. Russia already had the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Ukraine wanted the Kursk nuclear power plant, and then they wanted to exchange the Kursk nuclear power plant for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And some people say that Russia was storing nuclear weapons at the Kursk nuclear power plant. I can't say whether they did or didn't, but certainly the possibility of Ukraine getting nuclear weapons has always been on their agenda. So if there are nuclear weapons being stored at the Kursk nuclear power plant, then they got two huge victories in one military movement. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be. Here is the Kursk nuclear power plant from the satellite view, so you can see that this is a very large nuclear power plant. Then we take a look at the map. Here's Sumy, the city of Sumy. Here is Malaloknia, Korenovo, and Suja. These are three key cities in this whole offensive. So basically, the Ukrainians first were making a beeline to the Kursk nuclear power plant and ran into trouble after getting through Malaloknia. So then they began to spread out east and west to try to go around those obstacles. But unfortunately, they came into a terrain that wasn't favorable for tanks, a lot of rivers. The bridges were blown, so they needed to put in pontoon bridges. Those pontoon bridges were constantly destroyed. They would install new ones. In any case, they couldn't advance forward and they couldn't advance to the side. So basically, they were trapped in and they were being hit by Russian artillery, drones, all sorts of different attacks. And so this was reducing the manpower in the area, and eventually led to the collapse of the Kursk offensive. And how did we ever get there in the first place? First, Belarus moved troops. Here we have an article from the wilsoncenter.org. On July 13th, Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko was ordering the withdrawal of troops from the border with Ukraine after several weeks of growing tension, blah, blah, blah. Basically, Belarus moved their troops away from the border. This freed up these troops that were in the Ukrainian troops that were by the border to be moved over to the Kursk offensive. And so for many people, they found this to be military genius. Unfortunately, many people now think that Russia just sprang a trap for the Ukrainian forces. That will always be debatable, I think. But anyway, you can see here the various dates. First, the initial movement of the Ukrainian troops is the dark purple, and then as the dates move on, the purple gets lighter. So initially, Ukraine tried to move north and west to try to outflank Kursk and get to the Kursk nuclear power plant. And basically, they never really advanced much more than that. So this is basically, this area here is the area basically of the Kursk offensive. And you can see the distance that the Ukrainians were from the actual city of Kursk. So they never really got very far, and they outnumbered the Russians. So really what happened was they got to some severe defensive lines in the initial days, and then since they saw they could not move straight towards Kursk, they thought they're going to move towards the sides and then create a flanking maneuver. And of course, to get to the Kursk nuclear power plant, to take that nuclear power plant, and if there were nuclear missiles or nuclear warheads stored there, to get them, and then hold on to Kursk to trade for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So after the whole incursion failed, then of course Ukraine had to put out a narrative about all the casualties that they took from the Russians. So here we have Alexander Syrsky, the leader of the Alexander, not exactly pronounced correctly, but Alexander Syrsky. So he's putting out the narrative that, okay, we didn't get to the Kursk nuclear power plant, but we took a lot of Russian casualties. Okay, so anyway, that is his narrative, that it was a success because we delivered, some losses to Russia from which they can never recover. Okay, and then we even have one of these fact-checking websites, voxukraine.org, where they're going to try and dissuade people from believing any other narrative than that the Ukrainians had minimal losses in the Kursk offensive, and any numbers between 70,000 and 100,000 losses on the Ukrainian side are all lies. So the fact that they've gone to all this work, and who's doing the fact-checking? Of course, it's Meta. Meta is located, in California or Hawaii? Not too sure exactly where they're. So someone in Ukraine or somebody supporting Ukraine is going to go to a fact-checking site in California to get the accurate number of casualties of Ukraine. This almost confirms the fact that they're just stretching about looking for any third-party website to deliver information that they could easily get from the Ukraine Central Office. Of course, the Ukraine Central Office has this information, but they will never confirm it. So they have to go off to some quote-unquote fact-checking site like Meta to justify saying that the Russians are lying about the Ukrainian losses. So we can pretty much say that the losses of 70,000 to 100,000 of Ukraine is probably pretty accurate. So why would they go in to basically a suicide operation to try to get a nuclear power plant that they were pretty sure they would never be able to reach? Why would they do that? It's really hard to say, but my idea is that they called in the experts, the U.S. military generals in Germany, to advise them, and they advised very poorly, and just with all this adrenaline and all these Western resources, they thought that this would be easy pickings, but then found, hey, we got ourselves in over our heads, and now we need to save face with some narrative about huge Russian losses, about teaching the Russian bear that Ukraine can invade them as well. So what did they really achieve? They took a lot of little towns, they took a lot of farmhouses, a lot of cattle, a lot of sheep, a lot of goats, a lot of pigs, and that was about it. So they didn't get to the goal, which was the Kursk nuclear power plant. Their offensive then became a search for meaning, kind of like the Vietnam War. We need to find, we're gonna stop the dominoes from falling over in Southeast Asia by, fighting communism in Vietnam, when it really was all about the U.S. just setting up a colony in Southeast Asia and putting in puppet governments. So anyway, the Vietnam War narrative lasted, throughout the war, but afterwards they had a hard time maintaining it. Now I think the Ukrainians will have a hard time maintaining their whole narrative, but it was basically a disaster. And here you can see that the Ukrainians were basically hemmed in, penned in on three sides. You have the western side, you have the eastern side, and you have the northern side. So basically the Ukrainians got to the point where they couldn't advance anymore, either north, east, or west. And then now they are looking for, searching for some narrative about why they went in the first place, what they were trying to achieve. And but of course, if you're watching this video, the goal was to get to the Kursk nuclear power plant, get the nuclear warheads, and then trade the Kursk nuclear power plant for the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And this was quite a disaster for Ukraine. And you can consider that this Kursk area is fundamental to the Russians, and that they were not going to lose in this whole battle for the Kursk area. So if we go first, the first thing that it reminded me of this whole Kursk invasion was the Battle of Tours. The Ummayads had invaded France from Spain. They and then they were drawn in to an area which the Frankish forces had trapped them on three sides, and basically they were wiped out, and only a few of the initial force that arrived for this battle were able to escape and ride their horses all the way back to Spain. So you can see we have a river on one side, a river on the other. So the river is blocking the Ummayads. The Frankish forces were to the north of them. And then we have the Frankish soldiers who then outflanked the Ummayads. So this kind of reminds me of this whole battle, and it went very badly for the Ummayads. I think in Kursk this went very badly for the Ukrainians. They realized this was a huge mistake. They shouldn't have gone there. And also the importance of Kursk for the Russians. During World War II, the Soviets had withstood a German offensive in the Kursk region, and although the Soviet Union suffered greater casualties than the Germans, the German military wasn't able to withstand the losses. So here is this website, historynet.com. It talks about the importance of Kursk, and here is this key paragraph. As a consequence, the failure of Operation Citadel, which was to destroy the Soviet forces in the Kursk region, was not only a pivotal moment in the campaign in the east, but in the Second World War. So the Second World War came down to the Kursk defense by the Soviets and the failure of Operation Citadel. So you can see this was for the Russians. This is a very symbolic part of the front line during World War II, and they weren't about to lose here with the Ukrainians. And here from geopoliticalmonitor.com, we can see the consequences of the Kursk offensive. What is the key paragraph here? However, as operations stall and reports of mounting casualties and limited gains emerge, public enthusiasm begins to wane. Questions arise about the cost of the operation, particularly as key areas in the east are lost or left vulnerable. Over time, the inability to achieve tangible results in Kursk, that is the Kursk nuclear power plant, that was the goal, shifts the domestic narrative, and with some beginning to question whether the campaign is worth the sacrifice. Well, I guess it was worth the sacrifice if they would have achieved something, if they would have reached the Kursk nuclear power plant, but they didn't even come close. In fact, the Russians were waiting for them. They already had very well laid defensive lines way before the Kursk nuclear power plant. They wanted the Ukrainians to enter this basically kill zone and then destroy the military forces and equipment that they brought to the area. So here it comes up, this website comes up with the conclusion, so we can see whether we agree with it or not, but here it is. In the end, the Kursk offensive, and I'll highlight it. The Kursk offensive proves to be a mix of boldness. Wow. With dead people on the battlefield, boldness is so important. And tough lessons for Ukraine. Yes, very tough lessons. While the initial successes give Ukraine a much needed morale boost, oh boy, we're taking farms, sheep, cattle, we're taking pigs, we're taking goats, we're taking barns, we're taking hay. Real morale boost, and demonstrate to the world that it can challenge Russia on its own turf. Well, did it challenge Russia, or did it get drawn into a kill zone? Diverting resources to Kursk tends to leave vital parts of Ukraine vulnerable, particularly in Donbass. But the bigger question was, these forces that were sacrificed in this really idiotic, poorly thought out offensive into Kursk has left Ukraine without the sufficient manpower to be able to carry out any more offensives anywhere of any value. And this failure shifted the Ukrainians from the offense to the defense, at least for me. And of course, the worst thing that could have happened for this battle is that it's not even reflected anymore on the Deepstate map. If you go to the map for September 1st, 2024, there should be some, there should be the colors of the Ukrainian advance here, and it's gone. It's totally gone. Where'd it go? I remember I was following this offensive on the Deepstate map, and the color coding, the color shape of the Ukrainian forces was clearly marked out, and it was updated every day. And now it's not even here. So this is such an embarrassment to the Ukrainians that they don't even want to remember it anymore. So we go back to the, let's see now. We go back to Charles Martel leading the Frankish Forces against the Ummayads. The Ummayads were drawn into an area, into a kill zone. And if you take a look at the, let's go to the, if we go to the map of the Ukrainian forces in Kursk, it's another kill zone. The Russians had already hemmed them in on three sides, and then they just spent their time firing artillery and aviation bombs, all kinds of different weapons, eliminating little by little the Ukraine forces until they did the pipeline operation, which scared the what do they call, the Jesus out of the Ukrainians. They all went racing back to the border, abandoning weapons, tanks, cars, and in a fairly chaotic fashion. And then small little groups were left for the Russians to eliminate one by one. So, and if we go to the conclusion, boldness, in Vietnam, plenty of U.S. troops showed boldness, but without the proper military strategy laid out, and to have clearly laid out goals, what was achievable, what could be achieved and held, then it just becomes about heroism that winds up to be dead soldiers for really nothing, because the military leaders don't even know what they're trying to achieve. So, and finally, with Deepstate embarrassed by the Ukrainian forces disaster, they have completely removed the whole Ukraine battle map from their, from the dates that the Kursk offensive took place. So you can't even find it anymore. So that for me is the biggest signal that this was not only a big disaster, but this is an embarrassment. And in the end, during World War II, the Operation Citadel was a failure for the Germans. And it was not only a failure in the Kursk region, it was one of the pivotal turning points to where the Germans no longer were on the offensive. Now they are on the defensive, and they were backtracking. So why did the Ukrainians put themselves in the first place into a situation where they would be defeated, and this would be a huge symbolic victory for the Russians? It's hard to explain, but these historical similarities really are quite something. So anyway, I thought we'd start out 2026 with a report on the Kursk offensive, since this was going on a year ago, and what it meant for both the Russians and the Ukrainians, and what do you think about it? If you have any comments to make, please leave that below. I'll leave the link to all these different websites and resources in the description box. So again, thank you for joining me in 2025, and I look forward to providing you more content in 2026. And if you have any, like I say, have any comments to make, please leave that below. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share, and subscribe. So thank you for joining me today for this video. Wish you the very best. Take care. Bye-bye.